Hello, my name is Imad Harb. I am the Director of Research and Analysis at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. The Syrian civil war that began in 2011 at the hands of the authoritarian regime of President Bashar al-Assad has subsided, relatively speaking, from the daily news cycle. But the crisis remains as far as the continuation of authoritarian rule, the humanitarian crisis faced by millions of Syrians inside the country, and millions of others made internally displaced persons or refugees in neighboring and distant countries. The Syrian conflict, by any stretch of the imagination, is certainly not over. With us today to discuss an aspect of the Syrian conflict is Mr. Hamzah Almustafa. He is the director of Syria TV in Istanbul and someone who has been at the center of the crisis and has written about this specific topic we're talking about today. The aspect of which we are going to be speaking today is that related to the involvement and participation of Syrian Islamists in their different stripes in the conflict, who they are, how have they participated, where are they today in relation to the conflict, and many other questions of import today and in the future. Hamzah, welcome.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you giving us the time from your busy schedule in Washington, D.C. First of all, we'll start with a rather general question. What in general has been the role of the Islamists in the Syrian revolution, the Syrian uprising, the Syrian civil war? We are talking here about mainstream Islamists like the Muslim Brotherhood, jihadists, or Salafists.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you for the other colleague in the Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Yeah, talking about Islamism in Syria is very complicated because there are many trends, many schools, many currents, violent and non-violent, and the history of Islamism in Syria traces back to the 19th century. So it's a bit difficult to focus on in every specific current. So I'm gonna try to summarize as much as I can. So before the uprising, before the war in Syria, you know that Syria experienced a kind of authoritarianism that had changed all the political life. Does not mean that there were no opposition, but right. Mostly secular, liberal, and leftist groups working in a narrow space throughout the political salons, but they don't have the influence, or they don't have the ability to influence in the street. While the Islamist opposition, there is no physical existence. There were no physical existence of Islamist opposition before the revolution. As you know, that's after the military defeat in Hama in 1982, that the Muslim Brotherhood has forced to go outside Syria, and most of their leaders left Syria, and they work only outside Syria. So we can differentiate between different trends of Islamism. I'm going to talk about peaceful Islamism or non-violent Islamism in Syria. The origin of Islamist movement in Syria can trace back to the reformist Salafisms that established in Egypt and transformed to Syria, moved to Syria, established by Muhammad Abdo in Egypt, and moved to Syria on the hand of Al-Qasimi Rashid Rida and his student, who established many associations, cultural association, that's after that unified in a group. Some of them unified in a group under the Muslim Brotherhood established by Mustafa Sibai. Mustafa Sibai, the first guide of the Muslim Brotherhood, was a progressive man comparing to the conservative traditional leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood nowadays. He tried to combine between socialism and Islamism. He wrote about socialism in Islam. And he tried to establish party exactly like that, Christian party in the West. After that, during the unity with the Egypt, the Muslim Brotherhood, the group has divided. The first rift was between Mustafa Sibai and Abdul Majid Trabulsi, and then after the first uprising in Hama in 1964, the armed wing of the Muslim Brotherhood become to surface, and we can say the seed of Salafi jihadism started from Hama in 1964, especially after when Mustafa Hadid, when Marwan Hadid get an important role in the Muslim Brotherhood and started to establish an armed wing to wage a war against the Syrian regime, which finally ended by the division in the Muslim Brotherhood, and they established the vanguard. So this is the violent. We can speak also about the Wahhabism or scholarly Salafisms in Syria, but their influence was limited to some area in the capital and the rural area in Damascus. But this current or this school will reflect its experience during the war, and the other school we can talk about non-violent Salafisms that's reflected by Jawdat Said, who died 2 weeks ago. And this school ban using violent tool even in self-defense. So this current or this school was a part of controlling the government or outside the state control.
It had a political agenda.
The formal trend in Syria was Sufism and Ash'arism, which was in a correlation or a good relation with the Syrian regime, especially after when Hafiz Assad assumed the power in 1970. He broke a deal with Islamist figure that they can for example act freely in the society, but not participated or not acting as a political actor or not participate in shaping the political landscape in Syria. So when the revolution broke out in Syria 2011, that's Islamism that they don't have a foothold in Syria at the beginning. And you know that's the protest started as a national and secular uprising.
Right.
The national character was prominent, and but when the uprising, the peaceful uprising, transformed into armed struggle, then civil war, that's enabled the Islamists to enter what I usually say the public sphere. In other words, that's if I borrow Jürgen Habermas concept here, I can say that the Syrian revolution that's created a new public sphere that freed the opposition and Islamists in general, and allowed them to present their vision, their goals, and And you know that during 2011, 2013, there's many Islamist movements like the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and in Tunisia that's assume power. So like their counterpart that the Islamist Syria try to uh, how I can say, uh, to expand, to see the structure opportunity by the Syrian revolution and expand their constituency, and to try to be a political actor after a decades of exclusion. So,
Right.
we can, so we can.
Yeah, this is specifically what my next question was going to be. I mean, how did they deal with the nationalist secularist nature, so to speak, of the uprising in the beginning, and how are relations today? I mean, are there any relations today between these two sectors of the opposition, of the Syrian opposition? I mean, do Islamists and secularists still deal with each other? I mean, or total separation?
I think now there is a total separation.
Right. Okay.
I think that's in 2011, in 2012, when the peaceful revolution turned into an armed struggle. That's most of the protester who participate in a protest in demonstration carry out the weapons, and they were not a secularists, but they were nationalist. So during this period, the national character of the Syrian struggle, yeah, was prevalent. So at the beginning, Islamists, especially who established without no experience in the past, so try to cooperate, try to help the Free Syrian National Army. So
right.
at the beginning, the relation was cooperative, then started to be a competitive relationship between the Free Syrian Army and the Islamists. After that, there was a significant deterioration of the national character of the Syrian revolution. There is a big rise of Islamism by influenced by many factors. That's allowed to the Islamist movement to be, or the Islamism to be dominant in Syrian uprising.
Right.
At that time, we can differentiate between three types of Islamisms, or maybe four types of Islamism. So we are, and I'm talking about national Islamism.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not talking about the global or international Islamism,
right.
like ISIS or Al-Nusra Front, that they have a link or they have affiliation with Al-Qaeda. I'm talking only about the national Islamist movement. So we can differentiate between three types. First of all, what I call it, that it's a national or the local Salafi jihadism. It was represented by the group of Ahrar al-Sham. Ahrar al-Sham was the most prominent group in Syria between 2013 and 2018. The biggest number that's reached, it's almost 35,000 fighters all over Syria. And the second group was the Army of Islam, or Jaish al-Islam. That's derived from scholarly Salafisms, was located mainly in Douma, then expanded to Esra and Ghouta and the suburbs of Damascus, and posed a real threat on the capital, especially in 2013 and 2014. That's why when the Russian intervention, military intervention, So Jaish al-Islam was a priority for Russia. And after a military campaign, that's Jaish al-Islam has forced to leave Duma and Eastern Ghouta to Aleppo under the Turkish government
But
control.
this is, I want to interrupt you right here. You know, the existence of these two armies, the dominant two armies, I mean, did that coincide with a specific kind of position on the Arab political order? In other words, were they a result of intervention by Arab countries trying to support certain Islamist forces versus others?
Yeah, kind of. It's the rise of this movement reflect in some way regional and internal factor. So we talked about internal factor, but now we are talking about the regional actor. So of course, because that's Jaish al-Islam, as I told, it's a reflection of Wahhabism in Syria. So they received support from Saudi Arabia. But what I noticed, that's my thesis focusing on Jaish al-Islam as well. So there was no direct and formal fund from the Saudi Arabia to Jaish al-Islam. But Jaish al-Islam relied on the pre-network Salafi scholarly Salafism in Saudi Arabia and informal support, but the support was very generous. So that's enabled Jaish al-Islam to control all the Eastern Ghouta. On the other hand, that's Ahrar al-Sham was reluctant regarding to receiving a fund from the states, especially from the outside. So during after 2013, that's Ahrar al-Sham started to rely on Qatari and Turkish fund. Right. So and there was a competition between Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey in this regard. But also there, the Muslim Brotherhood at the beginning tried to work with the national opposition, but at the same side tried to establish a military wings, indirect relation with this kind of thing. But after 2014, it established the Faylaq Sham or Sham Ligon that has established that presented the school of the Muslim Brotherhood, that received support, got support from Turkey in particular. So, yeah.
So I'm trying to get at a point here. Yeah, I know there are definitely mostly domestic issues here, but the regional influence was almost detrimental, almost harmful, actually very harmful to the unity of the opposition forces, whether they were Islamist forces, whether they were secularist forces. So this is specifically the point where the Syrian opposition started to show some really weakness, whether it is on the political level or the military level, and thus allowed the regime to regain control, to regain the initiative, so to speak. And then obviously we also should mention the Iran and Hezbollah intervention early on in the war, and then the Russian intervention in September 2015.
Yeah, could be right in some points of the people, but for the Islamist, that's usual lecture about the fundamentalizing Islamist or jihadist movement that's highlight the role of international fundamentalizing and usually put it in a negative way. But
Right.
in Syrian way, what I noticed, what I figured out, that's uh, I'm talking here about de-radicalization and the moderation process. That's the regional fund helped the Islamists to de-radicalize and to abandon their, for example, radical thought. Of
Right.
course, in general, that's the competition between regional actors affected the Syrian revolution, affected negatively. That's, for example, appointed to the appearance of national leadership can control. But look, Dr. Dr. Imad, that's the the armed Islamist movement in Syria was very powerful. So the regime was almost to collapse in 2012. Then the Hezbollah and the other Iraqi militia came to Syria and intervened. And so after 2 years, Islamists was able to absorb this intervention. And in 2015, especially after Idlib battle, and the regime was very weak, and there was a real opportunity that the Islamists can overthrow the regime. Then the Russian military intervention happened. So I think that the Islamist and the Islamist movement or armed Islamist movement deteriorated after the Russian intervention, but not before.
Before, I see. Okay.
Oh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. No, the timeline, so to speak, of external interventions and timeline is very clear. But remember also that 2013, 2014, the rise of the Islamic of ISIS, and then a lot of countries, including the United States, started changing their opinions of exactly what are we doing in Syria, and the collapse of the regime, what might that have entail, and even Arab countries started thinking about this. So this is why, I mean, the timeline is correct, but at the same time, the influences, the regional influences, were actually quite interesting and quite impactful in that sense.
Yeah, I think so, yeah, but and this is a very good point. That's the establishment of Islamic State make a dramatic change in the path of the Syrian revolution, but not just only for the international actor like the Western state,
Right.
like
Yeah.
the United States, but also for the Islamist movement themselves. When ISIS started established in 2013, ISIS began to wage a war against the opposition and
That's correct.
against the Islamists. The first started with Jabhat al-Nusra, which affiliated with Al-Qaeda, then with Ahrar al-Sham, then with Jaish al-Islam. For example, the first group that decided to fight ISIS in Syria was the Army of Islam at beginning in the mid of 2013 and at the beginning of 2014. And also Ahrar al-Sham and Jabhat al-Nusra decided to fought ISIS in 2014 at the beginning and defeated ISIS. So ISIS, before Al-Mosul operation, was very isolated and was very weak in Syria. But what happened in Iraq was a significant turning point. That's the ISIS fighter crossed the border and came and they changed the situation. So that's why the Islamist was ready, for example, to cooperate with the United States. For example, the fair communication between Ahrar al-Sham and the United States started during the Ambassador Robert Ford 2013 when he held a meeting with them. But most of Islamist movement wanted to cooperate with the United States to fight both ISIS and the regime. But at that time, the United States rejected that to put the regime as a priority, and they informed them that if you want to cooperate, you will fight only ISIS. And at that time also, Turkey played a role that's banned Islamists from cooperating with the United States in this kind of condition.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left. I mean, where are Islamists today? The Syrian Islamists, where are they today in their different stripes?
Yeah, now there is no national Islamist movement now.
Right. Right.
There's no national secularist movement now.
Right.
Syria is divided between a group that they have regional or agenda or regional links, for example. So we can talk the first region is under the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham control. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham was affiliated with Al-Qaeda, and until now, even that's Hayat Tahrir al-Sham has undergone many transformation, pragmatic transformation, behavior and ideological transformation, but it's still it's a radical movement. So, and the de-radicalization process, in my opinion, it will take a lot of times. And Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, it's a kind of authoritarianism as well. So the Islamist movement are not allowed to walk there. And the second party is not. It's not Islam. It's not. Most of them were Islamist battalion, but not with strict ideology.
Correct.
It's like and the Free Syrian Army fighter that they defeated by Islamists and the regime, and they gathered in a specific area in the north under Turkish control. And the third region is in northeastern Syria under the control of SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces.
Right.
And you know that's also it's BED and Syrian Democratic Forces constitute almost 20% of the population, and until now ruling this region by authoritarian hand as well.
Right.
And there is no integration of the Arab community or the Arab tribes, the Arab Syria in the governance, something like that. And there is a control, there is the area under ISIS control now in the Syrian desert, especially.
Right.
And the rest of the Syrian geography are under the Syrian regime control. And you know how the situation, economic situation and living condition there is very bad. The Syrian regime, of course, ruling the city centers like Damascus, Aleppo, but outside the city center, it's kind of autonomy that's it's given to warlords as a reward after, because you know that there is no sources and budget for Syrian regime, so it's being gifted to these warlords. So that's why the Syrian state was not able to work again, and there's a lack of resources on competence and different problem of regarding to governance.
Right. This has been fascinating, really. Thank you very much for helping us understand this. Although I am sure there are a lot of other facts that we have not touched on, but this was really very illuminating. We appreciate your time. Thank you very much. We certainly hope that that Syria finds some peace, some democratic path to a different political system in Syria is still possible. We appreciate it. Thank you, Hamzah, for joining us today. And thank you all for being with us today. And we hope to see you in other interviews. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Imad. Thank you.